to the degree that you want something is the degree you're afraid of not having.
Yeah. God, I wish I started when I was younger. I go, well, yeah, but you didn't. So shut the fuck up and let's keep going.
Right.
Like, you can't.
Nobody changes until they change their energy. And when you change your energy, you change your life. Because it's not till then that it's really real.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this is way worse than I thought. It's like, oh yeah, it's way, way worse than you thought.
Yeah.
But luckily, there's more to you than you think.
Maria.
Aubrey.
Hi.
Hi.
So I haven't talked about this on a podcast yet, but since you were kind of interjected at a very key moment for me in my relationship with my now wife, Ilana, I thought I would bring it up and tell the story. And the story is that, you know, I'd had really strong feelings for her for a long time. And about 9 months before we actually had the space to start seeing each other, I wrote her a letter where I just kind of poured out my heart and expressed everything which has now come to fruition, but everything that I saw in potentiality in our relationship. And she read it and received it, but she wasn't in a place where she was ready to kind of look at it yet. And at that point, you know, I remember I read it to Kyle, who you know, my best friend, and I read it to him. I had tears in my eyes and I said, you know, this is the best I can do, huh, brother? And he's like, yeah, man, it's the best you can do. I was like, all right. So at that point, when that didn't kind of yield any real material change yet, it was, I think, working subterraneously. But I really let it go. I had let that go. And sometime very soon after that, you were in Austin. And I remember it really vividly. I was sitting around the kitchen counter and we were talking. And I was like, yeah, so, you know, I did my best and I'm just going to let it go. And you go, no, you don't. You won't do that. It's like, you keep a fucking candle lit. You keep that candle lit for that possibility and that potentiality. And I just started crying again there. I was like, okay. Because what I was doing is I was removing it from any possibility because that felt safer and that felt more comfortable. And that was moving me to the known reality of a sad reality where it wasn't going to work. But I was just kind of pushing that out of my mind. But in some ways, it was denying the possibility of what could actually happen. And you just stopped me right there at that moment. And I can't help but think that one little interaction we had in the kitchen definitely, you know, helped make this possible.
Well, thank you so much for reminding me of that story. You know, I really believe that as humans, we come here with certain passions, with certain kind of attractions, with certain things that we know that we're meant to be around, or people we're meant to be working with, or our lovers, our partners. We don't always know the totality of exactly what it's supposed to look like, but we're really clear when we're deeply attracted. And I think that is part of our soul's kind of GPS of what we're supposed to be doing here. So the beauty of being unattached means we know that there are things that we're drawn to. We don't 100% know if they're meant to, quote unquote, be ours, but we want to keep those candles lit for the things that we believe, you know, are in our future. And so to hold that vision at the same time as being unattached is a really profound dance. Because again, you're not denying and saying, oh, I can't have that. That's too impossible. That's too unrealistic. She's too good for me, or she didn't care, or whatever the thing is. The other side is that you hold it with such a closed fist of like, this is mine.
Smother the flame.
You smother it.
Yeah.
And so that beautiful fine line, and it's such an honor as your sister to have been there with you in that moment and really have felt your heart of like how real and how true this love is for this woman. And I just was impossible for me to allow you to extinguish that flame completely.
I appreciate that. And another thing you mentioned is something about how each individual has certain, like a matrix of codes, and another person has a matrix of codes. And sometimes those codes can unlock each other in really unique ways, which can allow the fruition of certain lessons, certain life path, certain accomplishments of aspects of your purpose or your dharma, your mission. And that was a really interesting discussion for me because I never really looked at it in that way. I always thought there was kind of matching attributes, things like that. But explain what you were kind of mentioning to me about how the codes can unlock between individuals.
Yeah, well, it's very similar to Daniel Schmachtenberger talks often about the theory of emergence. Essentially, that emergence is the most scientifically admissible term for magic, which means that two things can come together that didn't have a certain capacity, and then together they have that capacity. So he uses the example of respiration, right? Two cells come together that don't respirate, and then once they kind of unite, there is the ability for respiration. Well, where did that come from? It's this really powerful synergy between the information, the coding of both of those cells. And so I believe that same for humans, that we each have our really unique codes, if we want to use that word, or information. And then once we come together with somebody who has a very synergistic set of information or coding, something new is born. Something that wasn't there before is born. And that is evolution.
Yeah.
And holy moly, if we're not here for evolution, what are we here for?
Yeah, for sure. Now, interesting to me is that, you look back on all the relationships and they taught you something in some kind of interesting way. And so it seems like there's certain codes that are actually accessing trauma to a certain degree. And I was on here with my friend Aaron Alexander, and he was talking about how sometimes we go to experience trauma because it's kind of like the needle that lances a bubble that's inside us. By reaccessing that same thing, it makes us aware of it and gives us a chance to actually heal it. So if we had trauma in our, with our parents, we might try to replicate that in a relationship. But why? And his theory was the why is that that's actually getting us access to a sealed pocket of trauma that we have. So from that perspective, it might all be productive as long as we have the awareness of what we're doing.
Exactly. And that's the difference I will share is, do we have the awareness? Because there is such a thing as trauma bonding. And the reality is if people don't have the emotional intelligence or the capacity to, walk themselves out of that loop, then it just stays a big...
It actually enhances the bubble.
Exactly. So there are situations. That's why the conversations are getting more and more prevalent around, being in basically cutting toxic people out of your life or getting really clear when a pattern doesn't work for you. And I think that's really true, meaning that if a pattern doesn't work for you, it's totally fine to step away from it. The reality for me is that each person we come together basically, or two people come together as teachers for each other. And what are we learning basically at the end of the day? That's actually up to us. We can take away a whole variety of different type of lessons. The lesson could be, well, I'm just not available for that type of interaction anymore. Or the lesson, which I believe is a slightly emotionally more, mature way, is, okay, what is my side of the dance that's creating that particular pattern, and how can I shift it so that I don't experience that pattern with that person or any other person like them?
Right.
And that's a really exciting place to be, where you don't have to just run away or exile certain people from your life. And again, we want to make caveats if somebody's being very abusive or there's any sort of physical, unsafety in the space. Of course, take your space. But usually we're talking about emotional patterns and triggers that we don't want to feel a certain way. And so we kind of remove the person because they're the cause, versus there's something in us, wounding in us, that's allowing us to feel a certain way with that person as the character in our movie.
Yeah, it reminds me of the quote that says, no one is doing anything to anyone without their permission, right? Like this person may be activating something, but we're in some way allowing it, fueling it, it's accessing some pain body that we have, and we're staying in it if we are staying in it for some other reason. But awareness is kind of the sunlight that illuminates all of the murky shadows of what's going on in our psyche that we may not be aware of.
Absolutely. So we can choose to, again, run away because somebody's poking our pain body, or we can really sit with what is the true resolution to calm and heal that pain body.
Yeah. So let's say now, in the case that we do have that awareness, sometimes we might have the awareness, but we might be a little stuck. Might be like, ugh, it's just really hard. This pattern is there, and they've kind of gotten their hooks into some ego. And again, not any blame on anybody who's hooked anybody. We all hook each other, like we're massive hook slinging. We're like wild fishermen who are blind and just swinging our fly fishing rod around and just seeing what we catch. I think it's rare that there's someone who's intentionally playing that role of the, malicious seducer who's really trying to hook someone. I'm sure there's examples of that, but most of the time we're just doing it in ignorance, ignorance of what we're actually doing. But let's say we do become aware of it, then, and we do want to move beyond that. It's the term cord cutting is like really, popular now in certain circles. And so what in your kind of experience and understanding is, how do we extricate ourselves from these challenging situations? And then what is that kind of cord cutting ceremony, ritual, thought pattern, thought construct that we can use to actually give us some space?
Well, that's a complex question and a beautiful one. Thank you for asking. Actually, I'm loving that I don't know if we can see on the camera, but that my little mug here says home and it has a heart. And the basis for all of these kind of murky situations, to me, on a very simplistic level, is that we have allowed our energy to begin to go other places. Our energy, our attention and awareness is starting to just disperse. And if somebody is living on the other side of the world that you have this kind of hook or connection with, which is not physical, but basically let's think of it in this moment as physical, energy, attention, awareness is over there and it's not here anymore. Excuse me. Yeah. It's not here anymore. It's not with you. So I do this process with people often, which I call essentially coming home, which is calling all of your energy, your attention, and your awareness back to yourself. And you close your eyes.
Because where your attention is, your energy is.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's beautiful.
So to close your eyes, really connect to your dantian or your womb, the kind of base of where your life force lives, that beautiful fire of your soul.
And explain to people what the dantian is and where it is, so that if people want to do this. Actually, why don't you guide us through this thing? Because I'm sure there's all kinds of places where our energy is. Why don't you guide us through a little experience, like a guided experience of coming home?
I love this. Hallelujah. Okay, so I'm going to invite us to go ahead and close our eyes. Begin to connect to our breath. Bringing all of our energy, our attention, and our awareness back to ourselves now. Bringing your full focus to your breath. Nice deep inhales. And really beautiful exhales. Inviting us to begin to bring our awareness to the base of our spine, right where our body meets the seat. Feeling ourselves deeply rooted, deeply connected to the chair, to the earth, wherever we're sitting. And inviting us in this moment to begin to visualize some roots coming down from the base of our spine. Going deep, deep down into the earth and far and wide on all sides. Feeling deeply grounded, anchored, rooted. Beginning to pull up the nourishment, the water from the earth, from the soil. And feeling it begin to come into the trunk of our tree. And right above our root and our sexual organs, there's a little bowl. For the women, this is the area where the womb is, and this beautiful little bowl right here at the base of our spine is where this flame lives. this life force, this ball of chi that we can fuel, flame, and tend to. You're feeling the warmth in your body as you begin to grow this ball of chi. And we're going to start to direct that energy up our spine, to our solar plexus, to our heart, to our throat, to our third eye, up through our crown. We're going to feel that channel, that column of light going up, 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 up into the sky. Up to meet the universal mind, the Akashic records, the all that is. This is our higher self. A part of us that knows so much more than our small human self knows. As we bring that information, codes and rays from the sun back down, I'm going to invite us to land back in our hearts. Feeling that deep connection to Mother Earth, to Father Sky, and to our own eternal flame that burns within. Connecting to our heart, which connects to all hearts. Finishing with beautiful focus on love, gratitude, compassion, peace, joy, abundance for all. Thank you.
That was great. It's interesting. It's instead of focusing so much on the places where the energy has gone, it's really just focusing, like I said, on home.
Yes.
And if you really focus on home and just understand where you are, grounded to the earth, connected to the ether, to the universal mind, to the divine, and you find yourself home. And all of these other things naturally just draw in, because that's where your focus is. Your focus is back home. So instead of worrying about pulling energy away from all of these other people, which is initially where my mind went, okay, well, I got some attention over here on, this person who hasn't hit me back in a week, and this person who's doing this, or whatever else it might be. It's just like, okay, or just focus on home. And naturally that attention will draw back into the center.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That to me is the most immediate way. We can definitely do longer processes always. And it is sometimes helpful to go very specifically through your relationships or through things that are, that are causing a little bit of dis-ease, psychically, emotionally, spiritually. But at the end of the day, we all have moments where throughout the day where we're scattered or we are distracted or we're not fully present. And I actually really feel the moment by moment. Basically, I believe that enlightenment is a moment-by-moment experience. Yeah. It's a moment-by-moment choice. And that moment-by-moment choice is coming back to the present moment and focusing on love, being right here, right now, and moving from love over fear. And so we want to bring ourselves home as many times a day as it takes. And in that way, we will, again, naturally stop focusing so much on things that are not supporting us.
So in that, if you do find yourself obsessing over some current situation, the lesson here is to just take the time, as you said, as many times a day as you can to just go home, like
Yes.
be home,
Come
be
home.
with yourself, come home.
Mm-hmm. Another great just exercise or body of work is actually the work. Byron Katie's The Work. And I won't go too in detail in it, but it's a really great set of exercises essentially to analyze if how you're thinking about something is really quote unquote true. Like, is that really the truth? Again, oftentimes we're obsessing about a situation because we've created a narrative that is painful for us because somehow it's a story of separation. And so is that really true? The way that we're looking at the situation is oftentimes influencing how we feel about it emotionally. And when we can look at it with fresh eyes, and a more rational, because again, most of us, our pain bodies create irrational ways of looking at things. Right?
No doubt.
So when we come back to the rational or to the eagle eye perspective or to the Christ consciousness, divine, feminine Mother Mary, whatever we want to call it, this like one beating heart way of looking at things, we realize that there's no suffering here. There's actually no separation here. It's really just the way that we're looking at the situation.
I remember some of my most challenging times in relationship, I got in the practice and I just kind of got this download to ask the question, what is true? What is true? What is true? And I think that always came when I was the most centered. So after a meditation, I was able to connect and understand that. And I would just typically write. Sometimes it felt like I was even channeling the answers, like truth would just come in. But asking that 3 times, what is true? What is true? What is true? And then you see your stories, which are these scaffolds that you've created to access a certain emotion that you may not even be beneficial, typically isn't beneficial to you, but we're trying to access some painful reality for whatever reason. And asking what is true, what is true, what is true, then you start to see beyond it and you see the love that's there. You see the reality of what's actually there.
Yeah.
And then you may have that. Now, it doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. You'll be able to say that, oh, I figured it out.
Yeah.
I'm not going to have any emotional cords or anything that's drawing my attention. It's a practice.
It's a practice.
But at least knowing what's true and like writing it down, that's like some solid ground that you can come back on.
And that's the pattern of rewiring, or one of the access points to rewiring sober, right? Without any plant medicines or anything else, is to really identify where our narratives coming from a disempowering place or an untrue place, an irrational place, a pain-bodied place. And so again, writing down, journaling is so powerful to write down, like, what is the narrative that I have about this person or this relationship? Writing it down, and then, as you said, or a slight kind of variance on what you said, asking yourself, is that true? And then writing from there. Okay, all right, if that's not true, what is true?
Right. And
then I like the question I ask myself often is, okay, now what's even truer than that? So how far down can we get down to the basis of what's actually true in this situation? And usually, again, it has nothing to do with the other person. It has to do with the fact that a little part of ourselves is feeling scared, or is feeling lost, or is feeling abandoned. And so how can we show up for ourselves in that moment, give ourselves the love that we need? Go into nature, sit down, allow the earth to hold us, hug a tree. I mean, these are sound like such silly things, but they really, to me, are the foundational pieces of feeling deeply safe and deeply held here.
Yeah. That's such a valuable practice, no matter what, to get down to the kernel of your raw emotion rather than all the stories that we layer on top of it. I mean, the brain is so fast in creating stories, and it'll do it with whatever flimsy material it can. It'll draw in evidence and turn evidence into 2x4s and rebar, and all of a sudden we have this structure that looks solid and impenetrable like a giant tower. But it's all made of nonsense. It's just complete nonsense. And if we get back down to the truth of like what caused us to build that tower, it is something very simple. I'm scared. I don't feel like I'm enough. I'm angry, and which is usually covering some hurt, and then like we start to get down to those. And then from there, we can really understand ourselves. And then all of the things that we thought were solid, these scaffolds are like, oh yeah, it's not really that solid after all. Yeah.
It's not really that solid.
No, it's not really that solid.
Which is actually why I call the program that I've been working on, calling it metamorphosis. But I essentially say it's supporting people to build a more solid spiritual house.
Yeah.
Because again, a lot of us don't even realize, because we're functioning, that our kind of the house that we've built for ourselves spiritually, emotionally, even mentally is again quite flimsy.
Yeah.
And so getting down, that's why a lot of the work with the plant medicines and other type of really amazing work is to excavate, is to really kind of get down, look at the foundation of the house that you're living in, and see, are things rotting down there? What's going on? Clean out the cobwebs and relay that foundation and create something for yourself that feels a lot more sturdy.
Yeah.
Because in these times, as we know, shit's crazy, right? Like things, it feels like the sky is falling in a lot of moments. And if we don't have a really solid foundation and as I say, spiritual house within ourselves, it's going to be that much more bumpy.
No doubt. I mean, when the winds of the collective blow, then the strength of our home is going to really be revealed. And if there's cracks in the foundation, those are going to come up.
Yeah.
No doubt. You mentioned, plant medicine and medicines in general. Just to give people context, you've been involved in facilitating and participating in, if you were to guesstimate a number of particularly 5-MeO ceremonies, 5-MeO DMT ceremonies, how many would you say you've been involved in?
I mean, I've so lost count at this point, but definitely in the thousands at this point.
In the thousands.
I mean, across all of the different medicines for the last 10 years.
Yeah. So give us, for the people who are not aware of what 5-MeO DMT is and how it's different than ayahuasca and, NN-DMT, which is the other molecule. If you want to give people like a brief kind of synopsis of what this medicine is, and then I'll talk about some of my experiences, and we'll talk about some of the things that you've experienced and witnessed as well.
Well, again, just to give that little bit of context, if we haven't already, that I used to run the therapeutic department at a clinic in Mexico, and we basically introduced the first combination of Ibogaine for addiction followed by a 5-MeO DMT ceremony, which comes from or came from at that particular time, the bufo, which is the Bufo alvarius or the Colorado River toad. So it's very commonly known as the toad, which is an important distinction because, again, people oftentimes say DMT. They don't realize that there's NN-DMT and 5-MeO DMT. They also don't realize that within the category of 5-MeO DMT, there can be different sources. So it can come from a synthetic, can come from a floral, or it can come from, again, this, which is the toad. Yeah. So this particular medicine that we were working with in Mexico, which comes from the Sonoran Desert, right there in that area, Hermosillo was kind of the hub for us of where the medicine was being harvested for the clinic. Mm-hmm. And it's essentially known as the God molecule or the breath of God. So very different than NN-DMT, which is incredibly
Which
visual.
Sounds like hyperbole, but I will assure you, if you do it, it does no longer seem like hyperbole. It's like, oh yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
It really is. The toad lives underground, or the toads, plural, live underground 9 months out of the year. And they only come out in the rainy season where the water literally pushes them to the surface. And so the majority of their lives, they're hibernating or meditating underground. And so that their access to the God consciousness, to the no mind, is more profound than almost anything I've ever experienced.
I mean, they already got a leg up being a toad who's not self-aware in the way that we are, that can drive us into separation, into the illusion, the Maya of separation. Yeah. That's one advantage. But then, actually being in that, I mean, it's hard to even fathom what that kind of situation is like, where you could be underground, not eating, not drinking, not doing anything for 9 months. Hibernation is something that's like, doesn't even compute. Yeah. We understand sleeping. This is something far different.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember a friend telling me many years ago, again, before this was a popular conversation, the very first conversation I ever even had about the toad over a decade ago. And a friend was telling me that he believes that when they're under there, they're basically popping, they're like transporting themselves, and popping in and out of black holes in the universe, because what else would you do if you were just underground for 9 months? You would be experimenting with, with throwing your consciousness around the entire cosmos.
Right.
So that's essentially what the experience is.
Just being the cosmos.
Yes, exactly.
In general,
exactly.
all octaves, all expressions.
Exactly.
So for me, the experience between the two, because I've done NN-DMT, which is usually extracted from mimosa, and the mimosa hostilis is what is it, like a shrub? Isn't it a shrub?
Yeah,
kind of a shrub.
Yeah.
And so that has been probably what I'm most familiar with. It's also the same type of DMT that's in ayahuasca from the chacruna leaves and the opiaje and the wambisa or whatever they're actually extracting. Typically chacruna, though, that's what you see in all the Shipibo prints and paintings. And that one is to me, and I know that people have different experiences. To me, that's a much more visual experience. It comes on with this buzzing, and then there's the chrysanthemum of like this kaleidoscopic energy that you see that first descends on you in light, and this kind of buzzing in your ears, and this experience of this otherworldly reality. And sometimes there's entities, and sometimes there's places, sometimes it's just sacred geometry of beauty that's indescribable. And then it goes into this kind of floaty kind of zone for me, where things are kind of moving through and different visions are there. And this has probably been talked about perhaps a little bit more than the 5-MeO experience, because the 5-MeO experience is absolutely the most ineffable experience that I've had. For me, I've done it 3 times, and I've had 0 visuals associated with it. It is the literal somatic experience of everything, all creation, all universe, everything that could possibly be at the same time. And the only thing I can liken it to is the moment of the most intense part of the orgasm, where you have such a feeling of pleasure that it completely overwhelms the entirety of your body, and it just lights up every single cell, and you're just, whoa. That's why people make those strange faces and have these experiences. It's like, wow, but it extends for several minutes, sometimes 10 minutes or whatever, and you're in this experience of experiencing everything, which is really the only, in my opinion, accurate way to describe the divine. It's the all. It's the one source. It's the all light. It's every cry. It's every scream of pleasure. It's every moan. It's every sensation at the same time throughout the entirety of your body. And it's a lot to hold. But man, what a recalibration that is when you feel it.
Yeah, it's a total reset.
Total reset.
It's a total reset. I mean, I lovingly call it the shamanic car wash, even though, that seems to diminish. But the reality is that when you come back, that your windshield is just totally clean, because you've had the opportunity for maybe the first time in your life to not be you. And so many of us have a really hard time, even though we want to and we try to see life, like I try all the time to see life not as Maria, but as life itself. And I'm getting much better at that over the years. But an experience like this, there literally is no Maria, right? There's only life itself. And so what an amazing opportunity to experience that. I will share that as I walk this path more every day, a decade down the line, that it is so important to have really strong foundational tools to anchor these things. I'm seeing more and more and more over the years that if people don't have really strong meditation, whether it's Tai Chi, Qigong, Eastern philosophy practices of moving energy to support themselves to really anchor back the information, it just becomes, it may stay in the disassociated place. So I just want to share that off the bat, because this is becoming so popular now, right?
The integration you have to take really seriously. And I've done
seriously.
all of the different medicines.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I did 5-MeO, I didn't sleep for 3 days. I felt great, but it was this place, there was so much energy that moved through my body at that point that my whole system was just like electrified.
Yes.
And I was just doing my best, and I was journaling, and I was writing, and I was generally in a really beautiful spot. But, eventually the lack of sleep, it was like, okay, I got to fucking sleep at some point here. But it was, I needed all of the tools in my tool belt to be able to integrate that in a really good way.
Yes, it's a very advanced medicine, basically. And there's a reason that, your friend might offer you an NN-DMT pen, but my prayer is that they're not offering you 5-MeO.
You want to do this? We had a couple beers. You want to just go in here and, and rip the God molecule real quick?
Please, no.
No, please don't.
Yeah. My internal grandmother definitely cringes as these things, again, are becoming more popular. And I feel that it is mine to do, to be a voice, to remind people of not just the sacredness and the sanctity, but also the significance, because you are going in and really, your psyche in this moment it's a really fragile and vulnerable place to be. Yep. So it needs to be held with an extreme amount of care. So working with somebody who's a very experienced facilitator, again, Mexico is a great place to go, legal, all of the things. I love holding my retreats in Mexico because it just feels so not just connected to the land where the medicine comes from, which is so important, but also just feels the expansiveness of doing these things in a more, legal setting really is important for the psyche.
Because you don't want that kind of worry and concern that something else is going to happen. That's going to tilt your experience one way or the other. That's why I've almost always done all of my ceremonies, ayahuasca ceremonies in Peru, Wachuma ceremonies in Peru. Everywhere I go, I try to do it legally because I just don't want that stress. I don't want that concern. But equally so, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that just because you're in a legal place, you're going to be with the right facilitator. Mm-hmm. I watched with kind of real apprehension when I saw Hamilton Morris, who exposed this on the Vice series that he had, Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, where he was down there at a river. And, I'm not in any place to judge anybody who's facilitating, but nonetheless, there was people thrashing around in a rushing river full of hard rocks.
Yeah.
And I was like, that doesn't seem like a place that you want to be doing something that's this heavy. Yeah. It seemed to result in good results for Hamilton and the people there, but there's dangerous, physical obstacles in the way. And that didn't quite seem like the exactly right environment to experience this either.
Yeah. I mean, the indigenous ways of doing things are always to do medicine outdoors, which I love. I think you know that about me. I will always opt to, have our ceremonies of any kind outside, whether it's wachuma, whether it's ayahuasca or yahe, whether it's mushrooms, combo. I love doing the medicine work outside because of the connection to the elements and how much that really enlivens and adds to the experience. And again, especially with a medicine like the 5-MeO or the bufo, is you're physically in that moment. Your consciousness is in another place, essentially, right? Mm-hmm. You are not aware of your physical body, and so somebody needs to be tending to your physical body. Yeah. And I call me, overly conservative. My very first concern is for the physical body. I want to make sure that somebody's not going to accidentally crack their head on something or choke in their own vomit. Or I know these are beautiful, conversations to have. Not everybody wants to have them, but they're really important. And,
of course,
I don't want to go again too far down a particular rabbit hole, but we were talking right before we started recording about the fact that it is really important to do your due diligence when working with these medicines because they don't play well, again, with pharmaceuticals, as we mentioned. Mm-hmm. If you have severe health issues like brain aneurysm or heart arrhythmia or even asthmas, or severe allergies, these are things that you really, if you haven't done your due diligence, you might not even know because you go to a facilitator and they don't ask you certain things. Yeah. So my prayer, again, is that people are becoming well enough educated that they know how to screen themselves even before going to kind of seek out a facilitator, and to just share, if you're working with somebody who's not asking about your medical, your mental, your emotional history, then I would just kind of put a little question mark there if that person is really somebody who's going to be able to hold you not only during the intensity of such an experience, but after, as we shared. The after really is, that's the time.
That's where the real growth happens.
That's where the real growth happens.
Mm-hmm. There's, talking to other facilitators, before I actually was connected with you, they had, let me know that in a certain number of cases, people are actually receive the medicine in a kind of calm and they accept it, and like I did, and like I was able to do, perhaps because of all the work that I've done, or perhaps just my own innate nature, where it's just like, wow, and it's laughter and it's love, and it's this amazing experience where, but other people, they called them, the other facilities, they called them like the thrashers, right? Where they're in the 5-MeO experience, they're rolling around, they're moving around. And I've talked to people who've had this experience where they don't recall the thrashing part, but they started on one side of the room, they ended up on the other side of the room. And then the same facilitator said, and then there's a certain small percentage of people who get aggressive, who are the fighters. So there's like the people who are holding the medicine, there's the people thrashing around with the medicine, and then people fighting the medicine. But when I spoke to you about it, the way that you've kind of learned to administer using some important principles like minimum effective dose, setting the container, you've really mitigated some of those responses. But I'm sure you've had a little bit of a taste of all of these different, kind of somatic reactions, psychic reactions to this.
Yeah, it's the reason that I'm such a proponent for progressive dosing.
Yeah.
And again, that's something that certain facilitators would actually say, well, she's underdosing people, and now robbing them of the experience to have the fullest expression.
Sounds like a very masculine thing to say. Sounds like very like, throw them into the fucking fire, see if they burn.
Yes, which is the way that this is kind of traditionally done. But again, coming from the background of being in the clinic and working with very traumatized people, we had we had a program for war vets, and we were working with people who were, such severe addictions that when you really got down to it, my goodness, the trauma that they had experienced was massive. And so it's another reason why we paired it after the Ibogaine, because the Ibogaine really offered that person that opportunity to fully surrender. There's no running away when you're doing the Ibogaine. There's no getting up.
There's not a lot of thrashing around, because if you try to thrash around an Ibogaine, you're just going to vomit incessantly. It's so difficult of an experience to just kind of manage it. Like even standing up to go pee is like a fucking adventure.
Exactly.
It's like, I need lots of help.
Exactly.
I gotta pee and everything's buzzing in my eyes. I can't really see and I want to puke all the time. It's like, and I know not everybody has that experience, but it's fairly common in the Ibogaine experience. I liken it to being, the difference between the two is Ibogaine, first of all, it's 24 hours. So it's a much longer duration, sometimes 18 or whatever. But it felt like I was like an ant on a tuning fork. I was still aware that I was an ant. And I was still aware of my identity construct and aware of all of this. And I knew that I was the ant. And then there was a tuning fork, which was the Ibogaine, that was just smashing and vibrating, and everything was just shaking. And I was in there just shaking like, whoa, for a long time. And there's a beautiful mental clarity and a ton of growth and healing that happened in that. And then when the 5-MeO experience is much shorter duration, but you're no longer the ant on the tuning fork, you're the tuning fork. It's like, you are the tuning fork. That's it. Like you're one with everything around. There's no ant and tuning fork. It's like, there's the everything. And that's it. And it's a far different thing.
It is very, very different. Circling back though, the Ibogaine is a derivative of Iboga. Iboga essentially puts you into an extract, right? And then compound of Iboga, which is the root bark from Africa. But it puts your body into a healing coma. Actually the best description I've ever heard was Dr. Dan Engel, our dear brother, saying that it feels like you are being steamrolled and on a jackhammer at the same time. Because as you were saying, the vibration, it's a stimulant. So the vibration is so profound, but your body is literally in a healing coma. It puts you into what we call kind of an ectastic state. So your motor skills are very, very challenged, right? Like you said, you need help to go to the bathroom. And so again, that's such a place of forced surrender for so long that literally, even if you tried to fight, there's just nothing to do. And so the surrender is really deep and really profound. And I use that, or share that in correlation to, just again, circling back to what you were asking about the people that are really moving a lot in the 5-MeO experience, is I do find that is first and foremost for people that don't really have a lot of experience in the either in the shamanic world or otherwise, of true surrender of the ego, where the ego can literally just lay down and feel fully safe no matter what's happening. And so those of us who have put ourselves into, hundreds or however many different initiations that we've been in, where there literally is nothing you can do. You're laying there and you're receiving, and that's it. Mm-hmm. And so it makes sense that you and I might, in our experiences, relax and release much quicker than people who the ego is actually still very on edge of like, what is this? Is it going to kill me? Is it, what's happening here?
And it temporarily will obliterate the ego.
Yes.
So if as we're identified as our ego, as our identity self, as the temporal manifestation of our mind interacting with our body and interacting with consciousness, as we're identified with that entity is temporarily going offline.
Yes.
It's dying. It feels like it's dying. And if you're not comfortable with the death of that for a moment, hopefully you have the awareness that it will come back, because it certainly will.
It certainly will.
Mm-hmm. But at that moment, that thrashing might be like, oh no, I'm not fucking checking out of here. Like, I exist. I am real. And if I let go, I'm going to die.
Exactly. And we both know that not everybody's fully ready for this experience, right? Which is why I say, and it's an advanced medicine. And also why I've been fine, again, even in the clinic, we had times where, for example, with the addiction program, we for a little while had a program for the parents, which these were also not people that were psychonauts or, traveling around the world to do indigenous ceremonies. These were people who really were seriously at the end of the line, needing support for a very serious addiction. And so oftentimes, if they were young people, their parents, again, this was brand new territory for them. And they are at the end of the end of the end of options, right? Yeah. So much so that they're willing to send their children down to who knows where, Tijuana, to a clinic that all kinds of, in their minds, crazy things could happen. And so they oftentimes would come to a company to drop the, their children off. And I had an opportunity to work with those parents that, again, have never heard of any of this, never done an experience before. And that was where, the importance of the progressive dosing I found, of course, as I was sharing, for the war vets and for the, people with the trauma themselves, but also for people that are just really brand new. Yeah. And their ego is like not aware of the other levels of reality, which I was sharing a little bit with you about the book that I've been reading, which I'm just going to touch on for a second, but it's called The Goddess and the Shaman, which is a very kind of fluffy name, but it was written by a woman who has a PhD in psychology and social ecology. And she actually wrote this book as her dissertation. And it was her opportunity to kind of play with the differences and interplays between orthodox psychology and what she calls magical psychology. And she essentially says that there's a moment for most people, it happens in different levels, but where we realize that there's a lot more happening here than we previously thought. That the 3D world is only one little teeny tiny part. Mm-hmm. And when we have that moment, that kind of collision where we have to reconcile, she calls it the meeting of the intellectual mind and the intuition, which is connected to the higher mind. And she says that there's a moment there where you have ontological shock, or a moment of psychological crisis of confidence, which I love. For sure. That she says it that way. Psychological crisis of confidence, where all of a sudden you're like, oh no, the ground just left from under my feet and I'm not really sure. This is brand new terrain. And again, we all have little teeny tiny bits or massive experiences like this, whether on medicine or not on medicine, throughout our lifetime. Maybe I shouldn't say all, but many of us who are having these conversations. Sure. And we want to sometimes walk people there. I prefer, let me just say this, and maybe this is just my very, feminine way of doing things. I really value grace. Like, we can walk people there, versus, again, sledgehammer their psyche into forcing them to see, the fact that there's more happening here. Maybe we can allow their psyche to bloom into, taking the baby steps that they need, so that there is really strong integration. Because last thing I will share is people often, I like to say there are no shortcuts. So even if you're doing medicine work and you're here on the mountain and you are launched up here to look over the mountain, you're going to come back. You might, come back again a step or two above, but the reality is you still need to walk yourself up that mountain. And
you just know what the top of the mountain is like. So it's like you have a roadmap at that point.
Yeah.
I think one of the issues that people have is it's because of the criminalization of psychedelic medicine. If you do find the right facilitator, find the right window of time, find the right place, save up your money, go out for this experience, you want to make sure you have a real experience, you know? And I think the shamans know that. They're like, well, they didn't come all the way down, travel, 14 hours to get here to Iquitos or get up wherever they are. And, they may not have another chance to do this for many years. So I think, because I know the disappointment of many people who've gone to do ayahuasca, and it's been a mild experience. And of course, as someone like myself knows that those are sometimes the most important experiences you have, where just whatever you experience is unpacked later and you eventually realize like how beneficial it was. But in the moment, there's that disappointment. And I think it's really important for the shaman to know like, okay, like that's okay.
Yes.
And I think the great shamans all do.
Yes.
But there's also that tendency, like you want happy customers. You want people to, because this is a business too, they want people to go back home and say like, wow, it was amazing. And I've seen that be like an area where a lot of people trip up. It's like they overdo it because they want people to have the experience.
Yeah.
When that experience may not be the right experience for them.
Exactly. And that's brings us back to making sure we're working with people that are deeply grounded themselves in their why of why they're doing this.
Yeah.
And it can't be for the money and it can't be for the glory, because it's only going to cause problems, right? So when you meet somebody, which I do encourage to the best of our ability for people to meet their facilitators or practitioners before, really feeling like, how do I feel with this person? Does this person feel deeply grounded and connected to their truth of why they're doing this?
And I really encourage people, if sometimes you won't get that chance because they're somewhere in a faraway land. And if you get there and it doesn't feel right, discern the difference between your own fear and resistance, because you will have fear and resistance on the way. That's
100%.
going to be totally normal. But if you really sense something that's off, pull out.
Yes.
Like back out. There'll be another time, like live to fight another day, as the saying goes, but like live to surrender another day to another situation. And I think that's really important as well. It's like if you feel those red flags, and I've talked to some people who are right there at the moment, where like the opening ceremony is there and they've said, I need a minute. And they've called me and they're like, look, this feels a little weird. This is what I'm sensing. I'm like, pull out.
100%.
Like you'll find another spot.
100%.
You'll find another way.
100%. Yeah, we all are at this point, so geared towards the climax, towards the really big fireworks. And this is why, more and more in these conversations, I want to be the voice of like the unsexy part, which is the opposite of the fireworks, is the fact that whatever that experience is only going to be 1% of the entire journey of your life. There are so many other ways to go kind of venture up the same mountain, and you are never going to be hurt basically by having more preparation.
Yeah,
right.
For sure.
So if it's a no,
it may cost you a little money on the trip. And you can sit
exactly.
there and hold space in the ceremony and do all the different things, but
absolutely.
It's the right decision.
Yes, absolutely. And actually this does bring us to a little topic that I was sharing that I'm excited to touch on is this decriminalized movement within the United States, because I do feel like, yes, we do need to, have very experienced facilitators for the big, the ayahuascas and the 5-MeOs and these things. But with the more potentially gentle medicines that you can build with yourself, like mushrooms, I'm really excited for this kind of movement within the US, where people have access, and freedom and ability to grow their own medicines and to commune or possess their own medicines for their own spiritual growth. Again, going low and slow, as we say, and building that relationship and taking time. But I think this is going to allow a lot more people access, people who don't have the money, as we said, to fly to some other exotic part of the world and do a really big retreat. And it's going to allow people who maybe are, again, not even called to do really big doses, but to work with medicines in small micro dosing, let's say, or mini dosing. So I'm just really excited about this wave of decriminalize.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like that's definitely the way that is going to heal the most people as I look out with hope towards the future. And I think there's a lot of different social and psychological forces at work also facilitating healing, but these medicines are the sleeping giant, that really have the potential to make massive shifts. So, I'm just incredibly excited about that. And I think about when I had the podcast, and I was obviously a long-standing friendship with Bodie Miller, his first experience with mushrooms were not buying them from a dealer. He was young, still, in his youth, and he would just know that if it rained at a certain time of year, in the cow patties, there would be these mushrooms that would grow, and he could just pick them and then have a cap or have a stem and then figure some things out and grab a friend. And that kind of relationship, has really resulted in, for him, being one of the most conscious and wise individuals that I'd met. Is just he established that relationship and respect from an early age, and was able to okay, I know what this is, and I know what these tools are.
From their natural source,
right.
And again, I know you know this about me, but maybe listeners don't, that even though I was working in an Ibogaine clinic because of certain skills that I have, my proclivities, my natural the medicines that I work with are all straight from the earth. I want to be able to see, the medicine growing, and then, be with it. If there is even a process, sometimes there isn't, like you said. Sometimes it's literally like you can take that little mushroom. Of course, now make sure that you are well versed in mushrooms.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's really give that caveat here, right? Because
don't be an experimental mycologist.
Yes,
here.
that's
There's
definitely important
mushrooms.
that you can identify your mushrooms if you're taking them from the wild. But again, that connection with the earth, because they're literally there. That mycelium is actually connected to the entire forest, right? It actually is communicating with the trees and communicating with, knows where the water is. And really excited for people to learn more about the mycelium and the intelligence and how we also mimic our neurons and a lot of what I would even consider our spidey senses of mycelium that are connecting us all.
The documentary, fantastic fungi. Check that, Ryan. Make sure that I got the name right. But that's the name.
Yes.
Unbelievable documentary that really shows
Mm-hmm.
how connected these mushrooms are actually. And it'll really, I encourage people to watch it if you get the chance. It'll really blow your mind and really understanding what this medicine really is. Interestingly, I have a personal question. So mushrooms have been a constant ally for me since my first vision quest. When I was 18 years old, I went off in the mountains and Shaman facilitated mushroom journey. And they've been a constant ally. That's 21 years ago now. And recently, in the last 3 months or so, my experiences with mushrooms have been incredibly somatically unpleasant. Psychologically, I'm typically fine. There's nothing like I'm wrestling with, or it's not like I'm freaking out, but it's just so uncomfortable. And I don't understand what's going on. I'm like, you're my buddy. Like, why are you playing rough with me, buddy? I don't understand. We had such a good relationship, and I know it's still good, but you're really playing rough. This is roughhousing over here.
Well, I think it's just like anything else. Just what comes off the top of my head is our bodies know what they want and what they don't want.
Yeah.
And sometimes our mind wants something that the body's letting you know, maybe I'm complete for this moment, and maybe there's another medicine, or again, maybe there's no medicine. During this time, for example, that there's been so much stress in the air of, the quarantine and all of the things that are really, really alive in the collective consciousness. There's been so much stress for people. Their nervous systems are so on edge. I don't think it's been an amazing time for doing medicine. I have actually been really suggesting to people, take a break, really ground, focus on calming your nervous system, whatever that means, wrap yourself in your weighted blanket,
for sure.
And truly all of these different ways that we have to calm our nervous systems. Because when we're really frayed and on edge like that, it's not always the best time.
Yeah, like breathing and cold plunging have been so productive during this time. And then the medicine journeys that I've attempted, and has been in the last 3 months since the quarantine and everything, have just been really difficult. It's almost like I'm feeling the stress of the collective or it's been a marked distinction. I think it's good for you to point that out, because I think oftentimes you think, oh, well, that's happening out there and I'm here, but that's just an illusion as well. We are wildly connected, just like the mushrooms are connected to the whole forest. We're connected to the collective in ways that we do not really understand, but can only sense and feel.
100%. And I think that's part of our collective evolution, is really realizing and getting real with ourselves of how connected we are.
Yeah.
Because it is easy, quote unquote, to think like, oh, I'm fine. Everything in my immediate sphere is good, but things over there, that's not mine.
Yeah. It's yours too.
It's yours too. It really is. I mean, my personal beliefs, at least I will say, I don't ever like to say the truth is or the reality is for the whole, but my belief is that we are also inextricably connected, that if there is disease happening in one part of the organism, of the mind, of the collective, there's some part of us that is diseased as well.
Yeah.
And it would behoove us, not only for our own health, but for the health of the whole, which again is us, right? I really come from this standpoint of like, you might be an eyeball cell and I might be a liver cell, but we're part of one greater organism. It's not just me. This is the organism, you know, there's a whole organism of humanity and beyond that we are a part of. And the way that we identify a healthy body, for example, is that all of the cells are communicating. Because they understand, like, I need to be doing my job well so that this other organ and these other cells can do their job well. And it's in that communication, in that collaboration, in that coherence that there is health. And we are no different.
So I want to circle back to kind of where we started. And there's, you know, an understanding that is relatively new to me, but I'm feeling it and experiencing it. And that's typically the way I go. Like, I had no understanding of any spiritual truths or any ideas about what God was or what my soul was. I actually just threw all of that away. I was like, everything I've heard so far sounds like nonsense. But then I did my first journey and I was like, oh, okay, there's something here. And I've kind of built my understanding first on experience and then talking to people and understanding what other people have said about it, not only currently, but for thousands of years in the spiritual texts and the works and the philosophies and the books. So this understanding of sacred union and this thing that I'm experiencing now, which is kind of what we alluded to before, our codes unlocking. I mean, I've experienced healing that was formerly impossible, that happened almost like effortlessly. Like one of those things being that I was using Xanax to fall asleep for about 3 years. And then I did a little ceremony with Ilana and that was it. Done. April 26th was the last day and that was it. And that's not even medically advisable to get off benzos cold turkey like that. But I just knew that I had the support and everything was aligned, and energetically it was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm done. I'm ready. And I was able to do it. Now that formerly impossible thing was possible in the container of this sacred union where I felt fully met and fully received by the feminine in such a way. And she's experienced the same thing, different, you know, past sexual traumas and experiences that she's had, and different other ways that my presence, you know, as showing up in radical love and providing the containers allowed her to heal in different ways and also have an amazing time and a lot of fun and all the other things. What's your understanding of this idea of sacred union?
It's another example of so without, so within in my book. You know, there's something called the Heros Gamos, which essentially is those kind of two snakes of the helix of the masculine and the feminine that are within us, that also symbolize the DNA and the Kundalini and all of this. And so we are only fully healthy, whole, and healed when we are aware, when we're fully integrated, all parts of ourselves. And that is includes the integration of our internal masculine and feminine. And oftentimes when we're born into a very particular female body, male body, it is, the concept makes sense of you know, for you, for example, connection with the divine feminine, and for me, connection with the divine masculine. And there's a lot of work that can be done internally. And oftentimes I find it's not until like a real mirror, like that person where you look and you're like, oh, wow, you're like a limb that I didn't even know that I was missing, right? And again, not the like you complete me, but wow, like we fit together. There's something like we came, you know, oftentimes we hear the experience for very strong soulmates, if we want to call that, coming together. It's like you all of a sudden realize, oh, I think we set this up before, you know,
for sure,
that we were going to do this
and
now.
we've maybe done it a few times in the past. It's not every time, you know.
Exactly. So that moment of like, okay, you have something here, you have something for me. And it's that reflection again, like through your connection with her, when you're looking in her eyes, when you're making love or whatever, just even sitting with her, you're getting to see, feel, touch, taste, experience the divine feminine in all of her healing glory. And that is the mirror and the reminder of that internal part of you. So she's just essentially that access point that you have to always connect to your internal divine feminine and to feel XYZ, whatever it is that she evokes in you, and vice versa.
Yeah, that's, absolutely the experience I've had. And what's interesting is for people who haven't had that experience, they're looking at, because this has moved very fast. In some ways it hasn't, because I've known her for 4.5 years and we cultivated a deep friendship and an alliance and a kind of spiritual connection, sat in ceremony together down in Peru a couple times and in different, different situations. But once we actually, were able to freely see each other and be with each other, I actually bought the engagement ring before we even had sex. I was like, I'm just certain. I was fairly confident she's an amazing dancer and her sensuality is all that. I was fairly confident it was going to go well. I didn't think it was a huge gamble, but nonetheless, it's a little bit bold. I purchased the ring on, April 10th, and on April 24th, I proposed to her, and somewhere in the middle between that, we were intimate. And I suppose there was some part of me that was like, oh, good. I'm glad that worked out so well. But it was just this knowing, and it seemed super fast for everybody. Like, why are you moving so fast? Why slow down? And I was like, it's not that I'm moving fast. I just know. And actually I'm catching up. I'm catching up to what already is and what feels like has been forever. Like this has been the other whole sphere that superimposes in all of the empty spaces that I have to activate all of my other particles that are moving around them. We're both these spheres that just fit in the voids that we've had and then just electrify and illuminate one even greater whole.
Absolutely. Which is why I love that, as I was mentioning in the book, Dr. Jane Kent says that the intuition is essentially human contact with the higher mind. So that intuition, or that part of you that just knows. It's just an isness. Even while everybody else has their narratives and their stories about it's too fast or it's this or it's that, there's a part of us that's like an isness. Just like you have your 2 arms and your 2 legs right now, thank goodness, right? It's just an isness. Okay, this is the woman that I love and I'm going to marry her because XYZ, this is just how it is. And I'm so grateful that you have that connection to the higher mind that you don't have to question, go back and forth. And as you know, and you might have your isness right now, but there's a part of you that also knows we don't know what's going to happen in the future.
That's true.
Right? So the isness of right now is that right now, this is what's true. And let's see if that's true in the future. And I think a lot of people also worry or feel that something as big as marriage, for example, is, it should only be, it's a forever thing, right? And I love actually friends recently that wrote their vows, and they very particularly in their vows did not put till death do us part.
And the idea of parting is also a weird thing too, because there's so much of this kind of contentious divorce where people wait till they absolutely resent each other, absolutely hate each other, maybe never saw each other in the first place, and we're just kind of on this honeymoon, energy of like, everything's good. And they're like, fuck, it's not good. And then they wait and then they compound it. I mean, the idea of certainly the reality that we could be called to a different life. Maybe who knows? I could be called to a monastic life, or so she could, anything could happen, but the idea of us parting is also like, what?
Yeah.
That's
total
not
misnomer.
Real.
Yeah.
That's not real. Like we'll always be a part of each other's life, because there's no way we could love this deeply and feel this and not have just the most immense gratitude for everything that we experience.
Yes. And part of your journey, I'm also just so proud and in awe of you and the isness of commitment for you right now, this level of commitment of having this particular container. We use that word often, but literally means that there's something here that's for us, right? So you and Ilana in this moment have a very strong container of marriage and monogamy, or I don't know all the details,
all that
I'm sure more, but that is a really solid, it's like you're rowing down the river right now in a really solid boat, And that's amazing because now there's endless amount of adventures that you don't have to be thinking all the time. Oh, is it this? Is it that? Da, da, da. Okay, you just clear that for now, this is the shape, the form, and the container. And now the future is ripe with infinite possibilities.
No doubt. So before we close here, I want to touch on cultivating the divine feminine within, because I think sometimes we have the false idea that, well, you only have the divine feminine if you're a woman, which is certainly not the case. We each have both feminine and masculine qualities. And I've certainly experienced women who are less feminine than me even, and I'm pretty masculine by my natural proclivity, but nonetheless, like any sex can be involved in a, kind of unsupported and unflowered aspect of both femininity or masculinity, but particularly the femininity, which is something that obviously you exude off of, and it's very clear that you're deeply connected to the divine feminine. What are some of the ways that you encourage people to get in touch, male or female, with that innate feminine nature?
Time in nature.
Time in nature.
Innate feminine nature, time in nature. Yeah, in most indigenous traditions and ancient cultures, the earth is a goddess, essentially.
The mother.
Yes, she's the mother. And she is so abundant. And to be able to witness her and the way that she moves and the way that she grows and the way that her water flows, there's just so many kind of mirrorings, like the biomimicry of our internal feminine with the way that nature is. And I also don't like to create any certain ways that it should be, because I feel, especially for, the men in the world, like it's important to feel connected to your masculine. And the fear is that the connection to the feminine is going to be, what is it going to be? Weak. It's going to be wimpy. It's going to be, wishy-washy and all of these things. The true feminine is unconditional love.
Which is about as sturdy and strong as any force in the universe.
Exactly. It's like gravity. I mean, I know, as you shared, and most people share with me, that they experience my femininity very strongly, and they experience that I am one of the most consistent people they know. It's like gravity. I'm here. I love you. I've got you. I see you. Can't scare me. I'm going to be here tomorrow and the next day and the next day.
Yeah.
It's a consistency. But again, it is love. And it is this ability, I find, to be in the unknown. The masculine part of us really wants to know things. It wants to categorize them. It wants to identify them. It wants to put them in boxes. There's a really funny YouTube video that shows the difference between the male and the female brain. And the male brain says there's a little box for everything, and we don't like the boxes to touch. And the female brain is essentially, it's one big everything box, and everything is connected. So again, that part of ourselves that feels safe to know that we are so deeply connected to the everything, in particular, the mystery, meaning it's okay to not know. To be in the void, to be in the softness of, like, we don't have to hold it together all the time, because I believe, and many of us believe, that there's something, right? There's some force that is holding this whole thing together. We actually don't always have to be that thing. We can, again, relax, surrender. This is one of the things the medicines teach us. Okay, if I could take a deep breath and fully surrender, everything's going to be okay. Everything will be taken care of. I can allow myself to be held.
Yeah.
And so again, this time in nature, spending time with somebody who it really expresses the divine feminine, whether it is your, perfect counterpart like you have in Ilana, whether it is literally your mother or your sister or a woman that you know, again, or it could be a man who really knows how to hold another person. Not necessarily physically, could be, but energetically. Hold the totality of who you are in non-judgment, and in deep care and in deep presence. That, to me, is the cultivation of the divine feminine that we really could use more of in this world.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the things as we look throughout, and our culture is that understanding of what that is, and also the misnomers and misunderstandings of what that feminine energy is. And I think all too often when things get challenging, this is a great thing that the medicine teaches. When things get challenging, the more you resist, that challenge, the harder it is. The more you surrender with faith and just receive whatever that thing is coming up, the easier, the smoother, the more it works itself out, the more that you can see it from a different perspective. And there's always going to be a time for action and a time for doing and a time for moving through and cutting through life with your proverbial male machete and just hacking your way. Like, I'm a full believer in that, like there will be a time where you have to go and fight and like find courage in the face of your fear and move forward in these difficult situations. But nonetheless, like that skill of being able to surrender and accept and love all of the different outcomes unconditionally. Yeah. That's the mastery.
Yes. And there's a natural rhythm. I do really feel there's a natural rhythm when we're in deep trust. That, again, I use the kind of even physical to show like, okay, you can rest into the feminine for a second. You can pause. You can be in that void and that mystery and that kind of looking around and making sure that everything is working. And then you have the masculine penetrative energy where you're moving forward. And then you pause and you move forward and you pause. And again, this is just very natural rhythms of the breath, just like the heart pumping, just like the lungs opening and closing, just like the contractions of birth, to trust in that rhythm. It's really important.
I think it's interesting. And, for the last 8 years through the building of Onnit, which is and we're talking archetypically here, not talking about what a man does or what a woman does. Again, the archetypically masculine tendency and the necessity for building a company like mine is there's a lot of masculine things that you have to do. There's a lot of ways in which you have to construct and build and create systems and kind of figure things out. And I've been in that process, and then also podcasts and books and newsletters and all of these different creation processes. And I'm definitely feeling the call to like, okay, now's a good season to pause for a little while. Yeah. I did get myself, in a situation where I'm writing another book with a deadline. So I'm like, okay, pause after that, I suppose. Yeah. But in the meantime, like the necessity to support myself with even more yin practices.
Yes.
Like more and as many as I can possibly get. It's the only thing that's going to give me the fuel to actually keep going, because running off fumes and strength and will and resolve, is no longer cutting it, and so now like I have to ground myself. I have to spend that time in nature, walk out to the beach, put my, feet in the water like I did yesterday. And then the breath work is becoming almost daily now. And all of these practices just to give me the strength to carry through. And I know that after this book is done, okay.
Yes.
Then I'm going to really take the season to be like, all right, it's time for a big Bufo style hibernation in the mother here.
Yeah, you've done so much output over the years and you created so much. And now the time for the input and the time for the receiving. That's another really feminine quality that the medicines teach us, is the ability to receive. And that's the place where we get really fresh, new, not just energy and life force, but ideas. So that's a really powerful place for innovation. Again, when we're forcing and we're doing and we're kind of pushing, we're meeting a goal or a deadline, but it's in that moment of the nothingness that new information can come through. Yep. And so that's going to really influence the whole next chapter of your output.
There we go. Where can people tap into you and hear more of what you have to say?
Well, my website is sacredearthwarriors.com. And there we share a lot about the environmental work we do, the indigenous rights. I'm a big stand for ethical, sustainable, regenerative ways of working with the medicines, taking care of the indigenous, taking care of the earth. So sacredearthwarriors.com. And then that's also my Instagram is Maria Teresa Chavez, Sacred Earth Warriors.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, love.
Thank you.
This was amazing.
So good to be here.
I appreciate you so much. Thanks, everybody. See you next week. Goodbye. Love. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe. Also, share with any friend that you think might benefit from it. And lastly, go to aubreymarcus.com, sign up for my newsletter diary, and you won't miss a thing.